Moon Knight, my favorite superhero of all time. This guy goes by many names: Mark Spector, Jake Lockley, Stephen Grant, Moon Knight, Fist of Khonshu, and others. But like, what does he actually do? Thanks to things like the MCU and Marvel rivals, most of us, even those who aren't dedicated comics fans, have at least heard of Moon Knight, which, believe me, was not the case several years ago, so I'm very happy with his rise in popularity. But across all these interpretations, Moon Knight's character and his abilities can seem kind of inconsistent, especially since confusion is very inherent to the character, what with the moon god living in his head and all that. So what exactly are Moon Knight's powers, and what makes this character so feared within the Marvel Universe? Those are the questions we are here to answer today, and hopefully along the way some of you will become bigger Moon Knight fans and join me in just loving this character so much. So without further ado, let's get into the first topic we need to discuss when it comes to this: Khonshu himself and Mark's relationship with him, or possibly lack of relationship, because whether Mark is actually empowered by the moon god or not has been a point of debate over the character's history. After all, Moon Knight does have multiple mental illnesses, primarily dissociative identity disorder and schizophrenia, so a recurring question in the character's history was whether he was actually talking to a moon god, or whether he was just a crazy guy who had the skills and insane luck to make that sound not entirely unreasonable. This didn't have a solid answer for quite some time, and which was more implied really just depends on the preference of whoever was writing the comic at the time, but in recent Moon Knight comics there has been a definitive answer, which is both of those things are true. The Moon Knight series written by Jed MacKay has 100% officially established that Mark Spector is a very mentally ill man who is also actually empowered by an eldritch entity, and the combination of those things is why that question has been up in the air. The presence of Khonshu did not give Mark mental illness. He had that before all the Moon Knight stuff. But interacting with a deity, especially a notoriously confusing and trippy one, has amplified that mental illness, leading to it manifesting in abnormal ways, to say the least. This provides a canon explanation for why the symptoms of Moon Knight's mental illness seem to change so much depending on which era of the character you're reading. They actually do change that much, because he has a moon god constantly poking around in his brain, which just shifts things at random. Though as confusing as this often is, it also leads to the first of Moon Knight's established superpowers that we're going to be covering in this video: psychic resistance, or psychic desensitization, more like. To put it bluntly, Moon Knight is very used to mental interference because he experiences it damn near constantly. This makes him difficult to mind control or otherwise attack psychically, as 1, he knows how to respond to it properly, and 2, his mind has been so warped by outside magic that it is very difficult for psychics to navigate. His psychic resistance appears to be so strong that he is immune to hive mind assimilation. In fact, one time Moon Knight defeated a fungal zombie infection by allowing himself to be infected so that he could enter the fungus's mindscape and defeat it from within, which the hive mind could not stop because it could not absorb him into its collective consciousness. Of course, this is less of an intentional power bestowed by Khonshu and more of a positive side effect of Mark's very specific situation, but Khonshu does provide his fists with magical ability, and I do mean fists plural there, because Moon Knight is not the only Moon Knight. The name Moon Knight is just a title given to the agents of Khonshu operating in the mortal plane, and the moon god has had many agents over the centuries, with Mark Spector just being one of the latest, and seemingly Khonshu's favorite, which we will be coming back to later. Now, very important note when talking about the fact that Khonshu has multiple agents: there is nothing limiting him to having just one at a time. After all, the Moon Knight is often referred to as the Fist of Khonshu, and Khonshu has 2 fists. To that end, there are actually 2 of them operating in current canon. Mark Spector is one of them, but the other is Dr. Yehia Badr, otherwise known as Hunter's Moon. Hunter's Moon and Moon Knight are ultimately allies, though they differ strongly in the ways that they worship Khonshu, with Hunter's Moon being far more traditional and devout. So why do I sidebar into this other character in a video on Moon Knight's powers specifically? Well, Hunter's Moon gives us some insight on a power that Mark Spector really should have, but apparently doesn't. As a brief refresher on Mark Spector's origins, he was a mercenary operating in Egypt when he ended up betraying his group because they were being too brutal for his liking. He was then killed and died in a temple dedicated to Khonshu, so the moon god took notice of him and rose him back to life as the Moon Knight. Great, good, new superhero around, except apparently there was a step in this process that was missed somehow, as Hunter's Moon informs Mark of something he calls the chorus, which is the memories of all of the other fists that came before, which should have been implanted into the new fist's mind. Hunter's Moon received this, giving him lots of magical knowledge as well as instant mastery of centuries worth of fighting techniques. But Mark, the chorus just never made it into his head, the reason never being fully explained, but implied that it's just his own mental illness somehow blocking it. So theoretically, Mark Spector should be one of the worst fighters when it comes to the different Moon Knights, and yeah, Hunter's Moon does win when they first do battle. But then 5 minutes later, Mark returns and beats the shit out of Hunter's Moon with a baseball bat, which really exemplifies how exactly Mark fights. Enter the second official power that Moon Knight has, really more of a skill than a power, but I think it counts. He is an incredible street fighter. Yes, he is a trained fighter, and yes, he knows martial arts. Mark Spector was a Marine before he was a mercenary, so he is well versed in formal combat techniques. But also, then he was a black market mercenary for several years, and then a vigilante fighting supervillains on the streets of New York for years after that. So he knows how to fight dirty, and he's very, very good when it comes to that. When Moon Knight gets into hand-to-hand combat, he's going to do whatever he needs to take his opponent down as efficiently as possible, with little to no regard for his own safety, because he doesn't really need that, as we will go over later. It has been stated on many occasions that Moon Knight is a difficult opponent for even the most skilled martial artists because he simply doesn't fight in a way that anyone would expect him to. He's unpredictable and also doesn't block. If there's an advantage to be gained from it, Moon Knight favors just taking a blow as opposed to dodging or blocking it, which makes him nearly impossible to control in a battle as he just kinda does whatever he wants, and chances are he's more pain resistant than his opponent, so they're going to end up going down first. Hilariously, we know this information through Taskmaster, who has said he hates fighting Moon Knight as apparently he is too dangerous to copy. His fighting style is just so insane that it doesn't work for anyone aside from him. Adding to the unpredictability of his combat style, Moon Knight is proficient with pretty much every weapon: fists, melee weapons, thrown weapons, guns, crashing planes into people, which he's actually done multiple times. But none of this so far has really been a superpower in the strictest sense of the word. His fighting style is just a unique thing that he does, and the psychic resistance is a side effect. Moon Knight does have traditional superpowers though, sometimes, depending on the day, or rather depending on the night, I guess. Moon Knight's most classic superpower is super strength, but in a very specific way that is connected to the phases of the moon. More specifically, when the moon is full, he is stronger, and when the moon is less visible, he is weaker, though still stronger than average. This is a very interesting ability, as it does mean his strength actively fluctuates depending on what time of the month it is, but it's also not acknowledged that often in modern comics for a couple of reasons. One, just logistically, I imagine this is very difficult to do. I mean, Marvel's publishing so many things at once, and they all have to operate in a relatively similar timescale. It would be kind of tough for one writer to keep track of the moon phases when it comes to Mark's own abilities. But that's not the lore reason, of course. The lore reason is that this power comes directly from Khonshu, and Mark and Khonshu aren't always on good terms. Pick any Moon Knight comic at random, and the odds of Mark actually being cool with Khonshu, I'd imagine, are shockingly close to 50-50. Sometimes Mark works with Khonshu willingly, other times he abandons Khonshu entirely, and other times Khonshu forces his way back in and just makes Mark do what he wants, and the magical parts of the Moon Knight kit, the moon empowerment specifically, do seem to depend on Khonshu's direct presence. So given that the power not only inherently changes based on what time it is, but also changes based on Moon Knight's own opinion of his patron god, it's kind of impossible to tell whether he has this at any given point. I would just generally assume that he has mild super strength and leave it at that. That's probably close enough. With that, we're actually finished when it comes to Moon Knight's inherent powers and abilities, which seems relatively quick. Don't worry, the video's not finished. If it was just this, it would not have been enough for me to make a video on. Now, if you're a fan of Moon Knight through the MCU specifically, it might seem like I've missed a few things, but that's intentional because he doesn't have those extra abilities in the comics. Moon Knight does not have a healing factor, maybe a very minor one, but nothing near like we see in the live action, and he also does not have the ability to magically summon his suit in any way. The suit is just a thing that he made. I should take this moment to mention that the Mr. Knight suit is not connected to his DID in the comics, it is just an alternate suit that he wears, though the reason for this is arguably way better than it being a mental thing. Moon Knight is a dangerous and unstable vigilante, therefore the New York Police Department is prohibited from working with him. But sometimes there are situations that Moon Knight is far better suited to dealing with than regular cops, and therefore if he shows up, they want to let him through. The Mr. Knight suit was created as a loophole for that, which we see very plainly in the first comic that it appears in, where Mr. Knight just kind of walks past a police blockade into an active crime scene, and a rookie cop asks why on earth they're letting that happen, at which point an older cop responds that Moon Knight is a dangerous vigilante that they could never work with, but that guy, that's not Moon Knight, that's Mr. Knight, and he's just a concerned citizen. Plus, you know, the cops wouldn't really be able to stop him if he truly wanted in anyway, so this is just a far more convenient situation for everybody. Mr. Knight, concerned citizen, everything is fine now. So then, if Khonshu is not magically providing Mark with these suits, how does he get them, let alone multiple for different situations? Well, he has money. Historically, Moon Knight has been rich. This is less an element of his character now, but in older stuff he was extremely wealthy, and all of his gadgets were just things that he purchased with said wealth. His suit, his weapons, his various cool vehicles, these were just things that he got through money and mercenary connections, which is probably one of the reasons he had the reputation of Marvel's Batman for a while, though like I just said, this is far less an element of his current character. In the 80s, 90s, and even early 2000s, Moon Knight was a very Batman-like vigilante with a little bit of magical stuff thrown in, but from 2014 on, which is my favorite era of the character, he leaned way more into the trippy magical stuff, which made him more distinct. His arsenal expanded into that area as well, as Mark acquired ancient artifacts and various magical, or more accurately, anti-magical measures to expand his toolkit. This is actually one of the reasons why Moon Knight is my favorite superhero of all time. He is both a street-level character and a magical character, and the way those two intersect is fascinating. Let's take a very magical character like Doctor Strange for comparison. If Doctor Strange has to deal with ghosts, he's gonna have a spell for that, right? He might read that out of a book or something, find the exorcism that he needs, then perform the exorcism, and bam, the ghosts are done. Maybe there are some complications, but the storyline is roughly going to take that form. With Moon Knight, that's not the case. He is magical, and he has to deal with magical things, but he's not spellcasting like Doctor Strange is. If Moon Knight needs to deal with ghosts, better figure out a way to punch ghosts. That's not a random example that I made up either. That is actually a Moon Knight comic. There's a bunch of ghosts, he cannot fight them, so he has to get his hands on this ancient armor which allows him to throw hands with these phantoms. It's awesome. This leads to what I would consider Moon Knight's next official superpower, resourcefulness. Technically not a power, but in Moon Knight's case, I think it counts. Every night, Mark Spector has to deal with any number of wild things. Human criminals, supervillains, ghosts, fungus monsters, vampires, and when these threats arrive, he's just gonna have to figure out a way to deal with them. Despite his relatively limited superpowers, there's no other option, so he's gonna get it done. This is another thing that differentiates him from Batman, at least in my mind. Moon Knight isn't really a planner character. He's not a strategist who has a contingency for every option. When something opposes Moon Knight, he just takes it as it comes and figures it out as he goes. Ghosts? Better find a way to punch him. Fungus monsters? Let me throw myself into its mindscape and work it out from the inside. Vampires? Why don't we rig up the sprinkler systems of the building they're in with holy water? Moon Knight's gonna have a wild solution to every problem, and it might take him a minute, but he's gonna get there. This is also supported by Moon Knight's next power, which I colloquially refer to as being Bird Dad's favorite. For all the fights that Moon Knight and Khonshu have, Khonshu seems to love Mark Spector so much, and when the going gets tough, he can usually be relied upon to provide some kind of magical assistance. Granted, Khonshu is not all-powerful, and he's also unpredictable. This is not just a magical deus ex machina that Moon Knight can call upon to solve every situation. But if things are really that bad, especially if Khonshu's own interests are threatened, yeah, Moon Knight's getting divine help. Hell, Mark has summoned an army of zombies with Khonshu's assistance before. This is the point in the video where I have to divert into a topic that I really don't want to cover, but do have to when it comes to this specific video: Age of Khonshu. Some of you have read this comic, and more of you have at least seen it. Panels of Moon Knight doing wild things like moving Mjolnir and also controlling moons. Yeah, I hate this comic. This was a singular arc in a recent Avengers run, and the whole bit is that two very important things are happening at once. One, Khonshu has foreseen Mephisto taking over Earth and wants to avert that, and two, there is a rare cosmological supermoon, basically, which means that the moon is closer to Earth than it has ever been before, which is empowering Moon Knight a lot. With this enhanced moon power, Mark can control moons, like literally just pull them out of space and move them wherever he wants, and also control anything made out of moon, which apparently includes Mjolnir, as the uru that it is made out of is apparently moon rock. He also gets these enchanted ankhs from Khonshu, which can steal other people's magical powers, so he uses them to snatch the Iron Fist stuff and a Spirit of Vengeance from Ghost Rider, and Doctor Strange's Sorcerer Supreme abilities, just generally becoming obscenely overpowered for this event only. This all sounds cool enough, right? But the reason that I hate this arc is it completely misunderstands and disregards Moon Knight's character, because it makes him a fascist, and I'm not exaggerating about that at all. Khonshu's plan to save the world from Mephisto is to take over the world himself, which he does over a page break. Like, we don't get to see this happening, it's just the world is not conquered, turn the page, there's a time skip, and Khonshu rules the world now, and Moon Knight is his chief enforcer. He is a villain in this arc. He turns on Khonshu again at the end, of course, but he is an Avengers antagonist during Age of Khonshu. Also, his personality is entirely different. They never make reference to his dissociative identity disorder. They just ignore it because it would complicate the plot more. And also, I just think the book is poorly written. I try to keep things generally positive on this channel, so I'm not going to rant about this for half an hour like I absolutely could and have in the past. But yeah, I truly do hate Age of Khonshu. It really just took my favorite character and absolutely butchered him for really no reason. So going forward, just kind of ignore any of the wild powers he has in this arc. They were very situational to this storyline. He does not have them normally and will likely never use them again. Anyway, that annoying part over, there is a power from Khonshu that Mark Spector can count on very, very reliably, and that is bringing him back from the dead. Khonshu has brought Mark Spector back from the dead not once, not twice, but 3 separate times, and seems to have no intent on stopping no matter how many times it's necessary. This revival might not be immediate. Again, Khonshu is not all-powerful, and if he's pissed at Mark or imprisoned in some way, then he won't be able to bring his fist back instantaneously. But it will always happen at some point. Hence why I refer to this as the power of being Bird Dad's favorite. Khonshu is capable of bringing anyone back from the dead, and he does it for a lot of his fists, but I think only Mark has gotten it 3 times around. All this brings us to something that I won't necessarily consider a power, but definitely one of Moon Knight's greatest assets, a general aura of fear. Moon Knight is one of the most ruthless fighters in the Marvel Universe. He's a master of every weapon. He does not have any sort of no-kill rule. He's terrifying, and he knows it. Hell, he wears a white costume because he wants people to see him coming. Sometimes that's enough to win him the fight. Imagine for a moment that you are a criminal in New York City and you're trying to rob a bank. You don't have superpowers, maybe some minor villain of the weak level super tech, but that's about it. And you've got an ally keeping watch on top of a nearby building. You're in the middle of the robbery, your lookout calls you, says that Spider-Man is swinging by. Okay, are you gonna beat Spider-Man? Maybe, maybe not, but worst case scenario, you're not going to die. You're just gonna get webbed up and arrested, so this is worth a shot. What about if your lookout calls and says that the Punisher is driving up? That's a little bit scarier. The worst case scenario has escalated to death, but at the end of the day, a Punisher is a dude with guns, and your gang is probably also dudes with guns, so you have a fair enough shot. Let's keep doing the robbery. But say your lookout calls and says that they see Moon Knight. What do you know about Moon Knight specifically? You've heard a lot of stories from your criminal buddies, very few first-hand accounts, but definitely second-hand accounts. You know that he's a martial artist, he uses pretty much any weapon, sometimes he's magic, sometimes he's not, and also, you've heard a credible report that he has died. Not only that, you've heard multiple credible reports. Now, normally, if you're a criminal and you hear that a superhero has died, great, that's one less threat off the table. But the second that you hear stories of them dying multiple times, something is going on, and that becomes a lot more concerning. So if you hear that Moon Knight is rolling up to your bank robbery, you have genuinely no idea what to expect, but you know it's not going to be good, so how much do you really need that money? And Moon Knight, again, is 100% aware of this reputation, to such an extent that one time he walked into a bar full of supervillains, sat down, and said, quote, "I'm Moon Knight, and you all know that means one thing. No one in this bar, myself included, knows precisely what I'm capable of. I beat the Avengers, imagine what I could do to any one of you." And that terrifying little declaration right there segues perfectly into what I would consider Moon Knight's best ability. This man is absolutely relentless. Once you get on the Moon Knight's hit list, there is one way off of it, and nothing in this world or the next will prevent him from tracking you down and finishing the job. Moon Knight has gotten himself arrested purely so that he could beat up a criminal in jail and then break out. He has actively gone to hell to rescue his allies 2 times, and he has returned from the dead 3 times. There's no way to stop this man. If he's gunning for you, he is gunning for you until that job is complete. How exactly is he going to complete that job? Absolutely nobody knows, not even Moon Knight himself. But he's going to find a way, and Khonshu help you, you are not escaping. Is Moon Knight the strongest superhero in the world? No, absolutely not. In fact, in terms of superpowers, he's quite underwhelming. But despite that, he fights and fights and fights and dies, and then keeps fighting and fighting and fighting regardless. I love Moon Knight. He's been my favorite superhero for like 10 years, and always one that's like on the fringes of public consciousness, kind of slowly getting there, especially with newer interpretations like Marvel Rivals, though I should note, he's not as memey as a lot of people think he is. The Rivals interpretation in particular leans a bit more into the comedic type than the comics ever did, and I do regret to inform you, most of the meme panels you've seen are fake. But Moon Knight in the comics is not always dark and gritty and edgy and depressing, at least not in his better runs. He has his moments, and also, some of the meme panels are real. This one is real, also this one. Hopefully this video has intrigued at least some of you to go and read Moon Knight comics so that you can learn more about the original version of this character, and to that end, I'm going to do something I don't typically do and just openly give you my jumping on point reading list for him. If you want to read my favorite era of Moon Knight, which is the more modern stuff, I would start at the 2014 run by Warren Ellis. It's a good intro to the character, and then go forward from there. And if you don't want to read like 10 years worth of comics, you can also start at the 2021 Moon Knight run by Jed MacKay. That one also is written as an entry point for new readers. And if you're curious about the version of the character who has the alternate personalities of Captain America and Wolverine and Spider-Man living in his head instead of his normal alters, yeah, that's the Bendis run, and I didn't talk about it in this Powers video because it never really matters again outside of that run, and even in that one, it was just a way for him to learn different fighting techniques and not actually a magical superpower in any case. So now to end this video with a final note, I do think we need to acknowledge one thing as a sort of wrap-up. What exactly are Moon Knight's powers? Let's boil the entire 22-minute video down into one singular sentence, which is surprisingly easy. Moon Knight's power is kind of just being the Moon Knight. That is a title that has changed a lot and meant a ton of different things over the decades that this character has been around. But whatever the circumstances of that role are, Mark is going to work with it, and he's always going to get his target. He is going to be the protector of night travelers no matter what comes his way. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that when it comes to Mark Spector, at the end of the day, it's always night. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I hope it was an entertaining one. I'll be honest, this was a very quick and easy one for me to record because I love Moon Knight so much that I didn't really even have to research anything. All of this was just completely off the dome, and therefore it did not take me very long. But that's in contrast to the 2-hour video that I put out on Marvel 2099 as my last project, so go check that one out if you want something longer. Big extra thank you to my Patreon supporters. For those who don't know, I do have a Patreon. Look over there and you can find early ad-free access to all of my videos, and also an exclusive video every month. Making videos for you guys is my full-time job, so Patreon does really help me continue to do that. So again, thank you to all those people supporting, and thank you to anyone who goes and checks it out now. Finally, shout out to my artist, Ruben Perez, who drew the avatar that you've been watching talk at you for the last 24 minutes or so. There should be new poses for this guy coming soon. They were either in this video, in which case you've seen them already, or they'll be coming in the next video. I'm not entirely sure when I'm going to be getting them in relative to when this video is going out, so I'm just gonna record both options in this outro, and that'll be fine. And with that, I don't really have a final line for you. I already ended the main content of the video with the whole end of the day it's night thing, and there's not a better ending than that, so see you next time!